Hello everyone, welcome to the part 3 of the location prediction website series. So in this video we will seeing about how the Docker files are made, how the deployment is going to be made. So I am using Docker file for deployment. So there is actually Docker file and Docker compose file which is actually used to build the Docker image, and Docker ignore for ignoring Docker related, like by building the container, what are the things that we should ignore. So let's explore Docker file. So Docker file consists of two things. So the first is a node environment. For node 16, I'm using node 16 production environment, and I'm creating app directory, and copying the content of my frontend, my app folder into the app directory, and running in between install to install the dependencies. Then setting the environmental path and giving npm run build to build and everything. So we will be using the build folder and using the command npm start to actually run the production server. Then for Nginx, so Nginx is actually used as a server, as an Nginx used as a server for actually deploying the website for both front end and the back end. So for the front end, Nginx is actually being used for work there, used Nginx HTML or MRF. So and we are exposing port 80 for development for testing purpose, port 8080. So it's HTTP. So for deployment purpose, we should always use 443 or HTTPS. So then I'm copying the directories and default directories, and giving the command index g daemon off. So it will actually give the help with it. So this is an Nginx configuration files. So this displays the root directory of the Nginx which is to be served and listening index. So there are multiple methods, and so we are setting that kind of a header, like what should actually be allowed, what we should always have all type of routes that are going to the backend in this area. So slash predict and slash db. So what are the methods we're going to use, we should add it here. So in the proxy pass we should add what the backend url is. So if the backend url is like this, if it's from localhost, we should add localhost in here. If it's from some kind of a backend url, like some kind of ip address, we should add it here, such that it could pass it to the backend without a proxy problem. So it's we are defining the root and error pages and something. If there is an error page, we could define it in here. So this is an Nginx configuration file for the front end, and for the back end, say a similar approach is being made. So there's a Docker file. So there is also a Docker compose file in here. A Docker compose file will take the Docker file and actually run it and expose the port 8080 in the Docker container and 80 in the actually HTTP in the web service, and check where user polling equal to true is set for a to enable continuous checking of files. File polling and should be used for a testing environment. In production is not needed, as we are not going to react to every changes and check it out there. We must test it development and deploy it production. So it's a front end. So for the back end, there is an Nginx thing, Docker file. So Nginx, we are setting up everything Nginx need to know, some Nginx versions, and actually deleting the initial configuration file present in the Linux system. And Linux system is something that will be when we get deployed. So we copying in Nginx and running deleting the default configurations, then copying the project.config to configuration file. So Nginx actually configures servers, and the project configurations is a configuration for the whole project. So it's similar to what we see in the front end, but it's different for in a backend situation. So this is what it's actually serving the backend. So Nginx is for serving the backend. So we having multiple things like error logs, where the error log should show, and the severity of the logs, working process, how many processes, HTTP, and the default types, and log information, access types, and send file TCP alive, number of retries, and everything we could specify in this thing. And this project of conf. So we need to specify for which proxy was, or which should we allow as a proxy, so which we should direct the request to, and things like that. Server name, we could listening port, we could do everything. So that's an environment file we discussed in the previous video. So it's an apple file we discussed in the previous video. So as a Docker compose file, so there is two services that been bundled up in a single container. The Flask backend, which is the container name, and restart always actually checks for changes, and restart if the container is down or there's any changes made, it will always restart. Similarly is done for Nginx. So this by exposing the port 80,000, 88,000 for HTTP and build. We are actually building this this current folder. The context is with the path and Docker file. I'm using this Docker file building. So this is port and depends on Flask backend means. So this service actually depends on the Flask backend, which is main service, and the Nginx used for deploying it. So this is Docker file. So we are using Python. It's a simple Docker file. So Python version, and we are just copying recommended text. So it's always essential to have a recommended for Docker containers. So we can install our dependency in a single go. We are installing our dependencies, and we could just use the, you see that going on bind 0080 and wsh app, it will run the application, and server using Nginx, which could be accessed. So this is the initial configurations. We could just use something like if you are using Windows, just open the Docker container and just use Docker build. Then you can use sorry, Docker build, and you can use and name the image as my app or something else with some kind of version information, and you could put dot. So you should go to the current directory that it should be. So if you're going to build for the backend, first navigate to the backend. If you're going to build front end, just navigate to the front end and make the process. So it will work fine in such cases. So this is a Docker file for that, Docker compose file for that. So I'm associating the build as slash nginx directory. So it will go into nginx and get this Docker file and do all the things that is essential. So it will get this Docker file and make all the settings that should be done on deployment environment or in our environment. So this is how Docker file actually works. So there's an bundled environment we actually using for the Dockers. So it works good. I already tested it. So let me see on the next video. Next video we will explore DevOps, the stack scripts, and also Terraform. So Terraform is actually used for deployment of a creation of all the cloud services like virtual machines and databases, and the stack scripts is actually used for deployment. We will go into it clearly in the next video. Thank you.